For as long as I can remember, The Lord of the Rings has been one of my favorite franchises in history. The story of a little hobbit being the savior of Middle-earth, a world where such ferocious creatures, terrifying as Balrogs or horrifying orcs exists. This story's been inspiring and thrilling fans since the 1950s, and even before that, The Hobbit was released in the 1940s. J.R.R. Tolkien's world-building strategy for the land of Middle-earth has been used as a writing model for many works of fiction since its release. The story of Middle-earth is a perfect example of how a great imagination, an eye for detail, and captivating storytelling can change the world for the better. Even though the land of Middle-earth is a work of fiction, Tolkien used many of his own life experiences through World War I and his childhood in the English countryside, mainly Warwickshire region, setting the backdrop for the Shire, to write the story of Frodo. Leaving from the Shire on an adventure of a lifetime, starting with the book The Hobbit, which some fans feel wasn't as successfully adapted into film as The Lord of the Rings was, which will be a video for a whole nother day. I wanted to share from my own perspective why I feel that The Lord of the Rings has become so timeless not only as a work of literature, but also as an achievement in film as well. The history of The Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth. Funny enough, Tolkien began telling the story of hobbits and Middle-earth as a simple way to entertain his 4 children, and ended up entertaining the whole entire world. Tolkien began writing the story of The Hobbit in the 1930s at the age of 38 while marking school papers, believe it or not. When he grabbed a blank piece of paper and wrote the now iconic words, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit."
The actual beginning, though it's not really the beginning, but the actual flashpoint was, I remember very clearly. I can still see the corner in my house in 20 Northmore Road where it happened. I got an enormous pile of exam papers there, and marking school examinations in the summertime is an enormous, very laborious, and unfortunately also boring. And I remember picking up a paper and actually I nearly gave an extra mark for it, extra 5 marks actually. It was one page on this particular paper was left blank. Glorious. Nothing to read, so I scribbled on it. I can't think why. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. I think that was eventually published in 1937. I now wanted to try my hand at writing a really stupendously long narrative and to see whether I had sufficient art, cunning or material to make a really long narrative which would hold the average reader right through.
But little did Tolkien know how famous these words would be that pop culture would never be the same again. He finished writing the Hobbit manuscript in 1932, and Tolkien had lent his manuscript to several friends including C.S. Lewis and a student named Elaine Griffiths. When in 1936, Susan Dagnall, a staff member at George Allen and Unwin, heard about the manuscript and asked to borrow it from Tolkien. Dagnall was so impressed with the story and shared it with Stanley Unwin, who wanted to get a child's perspective on the story, so he gave it to his 10-year-old to review, and the child loved the story so much that Unwin decided to publish the story. The first edition of The Hobbit was released in 1937. The story was an instant success, even being nominated for a Carnegie Medal for Best Juvenile Fiction Story. The publisher then asked Tolkien to write a sequel to The Hobbit after its success. Tolkien submitted drafts of what would go on to be known as the Silmarillion. I think I'm saying that right. But at the time, the publisher rejected this draft, labeling it as too obscure. I can understand why the publisher wasn't thrilled with the Silmarillion. While we love it now because we understand how the world works, at the time, it was a little bit out there because it talks about how the songs were what created Middle-earth and all the different types of creatures and angels that were existing in the universe. So I guess I can kind of see why they wouldn't want the Silmarillion next and more of a traditional epic tale, which led to Tolkien beginning his work on The Lord of the Rings in December of 1937. The Lord of the Rings was originally planned to be a book, but due to the length, was separated into 3 different stories, which, as most of you know, started with The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and finally, The Return of the King. Tolkien began writing a simple sequel to The Hobbit, but as Tolkien continued to write, the story became more and more dark and epic. Since at this point Tolkien had already wrote a draft for the Silmarillion, he used many stories from that mythos as themes for the Lord of the Rings books. Tolkien finished his draft in 1949, the first 2 books were released in 1954, then the final book of the trilogy was released in 1955. Later, single volumes of The Lord of the Rings was released, which was what Tolkien originally intended for his Hobbit sequel to be, just one big book. When The Lord of the Rings was first released in the 1950s, the reception was mixed. Although there were some enthusiastic early reviews, some positive reviews praised the book as a significant work of imaginative fiction, with some even anticipating its lasting popularity. W.H. Auden, who was a former student of Tolkien, was a notable admirer. The book also received the International Fantasy Award in 1957. However, some literary critics were hostile towards the work, with some dismissing it as juvenile trash. Harsh words. There was also a feeling among some that the work lacked literary merit and didn't conform to the structure of a typical novel. Even within Tolkien's literary group, the inklings and opinions were divided. In the 1960s, specifically in the United States, the book saw a surge in popularity as many college students appreciated the book for its escapism, especially since the book was adapted to paperback, which made it more easily attainable. The Hobbit remains still the best-selling book, with an estimated global sales reaching over 100 million copies. Let that sink in. The book's being adapted for film. Funny enough, Tolkien himself was very skeptical about the Middle-earth stories being adapted for film. He felt that they were not suitable for dramatization. And in 1960, the Beatles, yes, the popular rock band, approached Tolkien about adapting his stories for film. Can you imagine that? A Beatles-themed Lord of the Rings? But Tolkien denied it, saying he didn't want his stories adapted by a popular rock band. Various other filmmakers and producers, including Walt Disney, Stanley Kubrick, and George Borman, expressed interest in adapting the books, but faced challenges in securing the rights or realizing that their visions, due to the story's complexity and scope, would be a little bit hard to attain in the 60s. Back during the 60s, movies didn't have the special effects that Peter Jackson got to enjoy while making his films, which made adapting these Middle-earth stories an almost impossible task then. However, this didn't stop one man from trying his best to adapt the film in 1978. Ralph Bakshi made an animated version of The Lord of the Rings. Bakshi directed and animated the film that covered the Fellowship of the Ring and the first half of the Two Towers. It used rotoscoping, a technique where live action footage was traced onto animation. The film received mixed reviews upon its release. The use of rotoscoping, a technology again where live action footage is traced, which created a distinct visually interesting style, although it was also a source of criticism for some. I mean, I'll admit the orcs did look pretty strange in that movie. Many critics felt that the film was flawed but an inspired interpretation. Fans were often hostile due to the film's incomplete nature and cheap looking effects, leading to a feeling of being misled by the title. The quality of the rotoscoping was inconsistent, with some scenes appearing poorly animated and lacking character, even though the film was a financial success, grossing a significant amount against its budget. But unfortunately, it didn't receive an official sequel. Some people were also upset at the film's abrupt ending after the Battle of Helm's Deep. The film's visual and narrative execution was perceived as uneven, with strong moments alongside confusing and inconsistent ones. At the end of the day, Bakshi's Lord of the Rings was a bold and ambitious attempt to adapt Tolkien's work to screen, but it suffered from an incomplete nature, uneven animation, and a critical reception. However, it has since gained a cult following and is recognized as a very important and early attempt to bring Tolkien stories to life. I will add that I watched Bakshi's movies and I enjoyed it and appreciated the effort and the care that he put into the movie, especially for the time, and was disappointed it didn't receive an official sequel. So why, you may ask? Well, it was a combination of financial constraints, the taxing production process, studio interference, and the mixed reception that prevented the 1978 animated Lord of the Rings from being completed as a two-part series. There was a Return of the King animated movie that did eventually come out, but it left much to be desired. Rankin Bass created it, adding a musical style to it. They were best known for their holiday features, mainly Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I know a lot of you 30-somethings will remember that. The film suffered from a limited budget, which affected the animation quality, particularly in the large battle scenes. It compressed a significant amount of the book's content, focusing primarily on the third volume without adequately setting up the preceding events. Some found the musical numbers to be overly sentimental or corny.
Frodo of the Nine Fingers and the Ring of Doom.
Up until this point, Tolkien's skepticism seemed to be accurate, as nobody had adapted the Middle-earth journey into something that people could point to and say, now this is Lord of the Rings. Until a little director by the name of Peter Jackson stepped into view. Jackson, who was a lifelong Tolkien fan, had to secure the film rights to The Lord of the Rings, which were owned by producer Sal Zantz. The initial deal was between Jackson and Miramax for a 2-film deal. However, Miramax executives, including Harvey Weinstein, pressured Jackson into condensing the film and the story into a single film, a notion that Jackson believed would disappoint fans, and he probably would have been right. Just goes to show you that Harvey Weinstein had a history of making terrible decisions even back then. Jackson, not wanting to compromise his vision for the story, was allowed to shop around the movie to other studios and soon found that New Line Cinema not only agreed with Jackson's vision, but encouraged him to make it a trilogy. New Line Cinema's CEO Robert Shea was impressed by the scope of Jackson's vision and suggested expanding the project to 3 films, recognizing the commercial potential for a trilogy, and he was right.
It's really, a tribute to New Line Cinema, to Michael Lynn and Bob Shea, because they've taken a gamble that I think will probably go down in history as one of the all-time Hollywood gambles, because, nobody has ever said we'll pay for 3 films, 3 big budget, expensive, complicated films. We'll shoot them all together before we've released the first one, because we don't even know if the first one's going to succeed or not at the box office. I mean, it's a hell of a risk.
And convinced New Line to take on the project. New Line Cinema took a significant financial risk by backing the ambitious 3-film project, providing Jackson with the necessary budget to realize his vision. It's even rumored that Jackson, in a bold move, feigned being busy with other studios to create a sense of competition that would convince New Line to take on the project, and it worked. To manage the massive scale of the project, Jackson made the unprecedented decision to shoot all 3 films simultaneously in New Zealand. This required him to establish a large-scale production operation, including building sets, hiring massive crews, and organizing logistics in a remote location. He collaborated with talented artists like Alan Lee and John Howe to develop the visual design of Middle-earth, creating detailed concepts for sets, costumes, and creatures. Jackson fought to maintain his artistic vision throughout the production, ensuring the film stayed true to the spirit of Tolkien's work, despite pressures to make changes. Peter Jackson's vision for the Lord of the Rings films was deeply rooted in his respect and admiration for J.R.R. Tolkien's original work. While adaptations always involve changes, to accommodate the cinematic medium, Jackson made the conscious effort to stay true to the film and core elements of Tolkien's world. In my opinion, this is clearly a big reason why so many fans hold the films in such high acclaim. Time and time again, we see directors or studio heads making changes to source material, much to the detriment of the stories that the fans want to see. But Jackson kept his focus on bringing Tolkien's work to the masses. I think when I take a look at why so many adaptations fail when being brought to film, it all comes down to one thing: the source material. How so many studios seem to abandon the source material for a completely strange retelling that has nothing to do with the source material has left fans disappointed more times than I can count. And it's this aspect of Jackson's appreciation for the source material that has made this film the absolute masterpiece that it's known for. The film is considered by many to be one of the greatest achievements in film history and has made Tolkien's work one of the most popular franchises in history. It's up there with Star Wars, baby. This is just what it took to get the story out to the masses. Now, it's time to dive into the story itself. The story of Middle-earth. The story of Middle-earth is best described as good standing defiant in the eyes of overwhelming odds that are evil. While the side of good was elves, dwarves, men, and hobbits, evil had some of the most terrifying friggin' creatures ever put into literature. The creature that strikes fear into me most would be the Balrog, a giant fire demon that has a whip and a sword from the ancient days. Now, Gandalf 1v1 this thing, specifically one named Doran's Bane. That's right, these Balrogs had names, because in the first era of Middle-earth, there was actually a lot of these Balrogs, the horrifying creation of Melkor, the original Dark Lord Morgoth, who was also at one time Sauron's master. That should show you just how insane the ancient world was. These elves had to face these horrors on their own, and men didn't come along until the sun and the moon entered the sky. So when you think about it, elves kind of had it harder and rougher than any other creature because they could remember this because they're immortal beings. Although I will say the dwarves kind of had it pretty rough too. The elves had to face these things all by themselves during the first age, and they actually hung in there with them. Tolkien wrote in the Silmarillion that the Earth, as part of the wider world of Arda, which Arda is the Earth, was created through a process known as Alundel, or the music of Ainur. Eru Ilúvatar, the one at the beginning, there was only one Eru Ilúvatar, the supreme being who existed beyond the created world. Think of him as like God. Tolkien, being a devout Catholic, presented Eru Ilúvatar as a divine figure. Though direct worship of Eru is never prominent in the narratives, from his thoughts, Eru created a group of angelic beings called the Ainur, also referred to as the Holy Ones. They resided in the Timeless Halls, a place beyond the universe. Eru taught the Ainur to create music, and they began to sing themes according to his design. Each Ainur understood a specific part of Eru's mind, but through the music they learned to sing together in harmony, creating life. However, friggin' Melkor, the most powerful Ainur, introduced discord into the music by adding themes of his own, disrupting the harmony and representing the first evil in Tolkien's world. Although Eru was like, "Stop, Melkor, you're messing up my song," and he ended up introducing new themes into the music, enhancing it beyond even the Ainur's comprehension. He then showed them a vision of the world that would be, which unfolded before them, known as the Firstborn. The elves were the first children of Eru Ilúvatar to awaken in Middle-earth, at Corrivenen, I think I'm getting these words right, I'm trying my best here, during the Years of the Trees. Orcs and dwarves were born around the same time as the elves, or shortly after. Orcs were created by Morgoth, a corrupted Ainur who created orcs by torturing and corrupting the firstborn elves. And then we had dwarves. The Vale Aulu created the dwarves, but they were not allowed to awaken until after the elves. Durin was the first dwarf to awaken in Mount Dunbadad, followed by other followers of the dwarves. The dwarves' awakening suggested to have occurred around the same time as the last group of elves departed across the sea, around VY 1150. The Ents, who are these magnificent tree-walking creatures, you see them in the Two Towers, are considered an ancient race of Middle-earth, likely appearing after the Ainur and alongside or soon after the elves and the dwarves. The second-born children of Ilúvatar were men who awoke in Hidorian, in the far east of Middle-earth, at the first rising of the sun and at the beginning of the First Age. You getting all this? So men were around when those frickin' demons, Balrogs, were walking around too, and dragons and stuff. When you go watch the Silmarillion or learn the history of Middle-earth, you don't see a lot of men until about halfway through the First Age. Now, hobbits are actually generally considered to be a branch of the race of men. Now, before anybody jumps down my throat, okay, timelines in Tolkien's Legendarium can be complex and may vary slightly across different texts, but this is genuinely considered the timeline of the species. Morgoth, who was the rogue Ainur, remember the guy that was messing up the songs, created many beasts that roam the lands of Middle-earth, such as Balrogs, dragons, and he was the one who gave Sauron, who created the Ring Race, his power. Sauron, of course, is the main antagonist of the Lord of the Rings. While I'm not going to go through the entire story, as at this point it's pretty well known, here's a brief summary. Frodo, who is the nephew of Bilbo, the main character from The Hobbit, is entrusted with a ring. This ring is later found out to be the one that Sauron created and contains power beyond understanding. As it was created by Sauron, the loyal assistant of Morgoth, the original Dark Lord, Frodo's tasked with taking the ring into Mordor to destroy it in Mount Doom. Along his journey, he meets a guy named Tom Bombadil. This guy was not in the Peter Jackson movies, but this guy has sparked a lot of controversy, mainly because nobody really knows what his power actually is. I think that he's supposed to be kind of like a representation of Mother Nature, or something along that lines, or like the human embodiment of Earth itself, Arda, if you will. That's the best that I can kind of figure out with Tom Bombadil.
Back in the Withy window, folk used to call me Bombadil. Tom Bombadil.
I don't know anything about Tom Bombadil. Your guess is as good as mine. He sets out with the elf Legolas, Aragorn, a man who is the heir to the throne of Gondor, Gimli, son of Gloin. Gloin was actually in the original Hobbit story as part of Thorin Oakenshield's party. And Boromir, a warrior from Gondor, whose meme game is next level. Unfortunately, the party gets separated and goes their own ways, creating their own journeys. Now, the interesting thing is, Aragorn's like 87, which would make him elderly by traditional human standards. But since Aragorn is one of the Dunedain, he's blessed with long life.
Then you must be at least 60. 70? You cannot be 80.
87.
You are one of the Dunedain. a descendant of Numenor, blessed with long life.
These men who were gifted with longer lives could live several hundred years, with some living up to 400 years old at their peak. A 400-year-old man, now that's something I'd like to see. Bro's older than the United States of America. That's dope. However, this lifespan gradually diminished over time, and by the Third Age, the average lifespan of a man of Numenorian blood was around 237 years. That's like double the lifetime of what we get to live, though. Aragorn, again, who had Numenorian blood, lived to be 210 years old. 87 in Numenor years is more like 30 in regular human years, so Aragorn, by all accounts, is not really that old. Elves are immortal and live forever unless they're killed in battle. The average lifespan for a dwarf is often around 250 years, and the men of Rohan or Gondor live lives similar to that of you and me. And then you had half-elven. Those that are half-elf, half-men got to choose whether they wanted to live among the elves or live among the men. Elros, who was a half-elf who chose mortality, lived for around 500 years. This makes very interesting dynamics on the world. And then of course we have Gandalf, who's actually not just a wizard. He is a Maiar, a type of immortal spirit. The Maiar are the lesser brethren of the Ainur, who are the angelic beings who help shape the world of Arda. You know, the ones who sang, "I wanna rock and create life with my music." No? Gandalf is one of the Istari, a group of 5 Maiar who were sent to Middle-earth in the form of old men to help guide and assist the free peoples in their struggles against Sauron. Saruman is a Maiar who ended up betraying the other Maiar and joined Sauron.
Leave Sauron to me.
I guess their names being so similar, Sauron, Saruman, made them decide to buddy up. Purely kick-ass action. The action sequences in The Lord of the Rings is one of the most appealing aspects of the story. Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films are renowned for their incredible battle sequences, which were achieved through a combination of cutting-edge technology and innovative filmmaking techniques. Here's a look at how they made those epic battles come to life. Massive Software, Weta Digital, Jackson's visual effects company, developed revolutionary software called Massive, which stands for Multiple Agent Simulation Systems in Virtual Environments. That is a mouthful. This program allowed them to simulate the behavior of thousands of individual soldiers, each with their own unique movements and reactions. This gave the battle scenes that unprecedented level of realism and scale that Bakshi wished he could have. This breakthrough in film is what helped Jackson succeed where many other filmmakers failed. Massive enabled the creation of vast armies clashing on screen, making the battles feel truly epic and overwhelming. While CGI was crucial, the films also relied heavily on practical effects and miniatures. They literally build sets of iconic locations like Helm's Deep and Minas Tirith, adding a tangible element to the battles. Weta Workshop created intricate costumes, armor, weapons, and prosthetics for the various armies, adding to the visual authenticity of the scene. For example, they developed detailed orc suits and prosthetics to bring these creatures to life. The acclaimed musical score for Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings film trilogy was composed by Howard Shore. He composed the score and conducted the music for all 3 films, and it is by far one of the most iconic things about these films. You can't hear these songs without thinking of Lord of the Rings. In fact, his work was so good that he received critical acclaim and several awards. He won an Academy Award for Best Original Score for The Fellowship of the Ring and The Return of the King, and Best Original Song for Intro to the West from The Return of the King. He also received Golden Globe Awards for his Best Original Score and Best Original Song for The Return of the King, and won multiple Grammy Awards for scores of Into the West again. Shore's scores is recognized for its use of distinctive themes and leitmotifs representing characters, locations, and concepts, and incorporates various musical elements to create an immersive sound. Unfortunately, though, there has been some hits and misses when it comes to bringing Lord of the Rings to the live screen, and you know where I'm going with this. We're going to talk about Amazon's Ring of Power. Failures and recent attempts. Unfortunately, you think that people would learn something from watching Peter Jackson's films, but don't tell that to Amazon, because unfortunately, there have been controversial retellings of Tolkien's series as of late, with Amazon's The Ring of Power series, which has received mixed reception, with some viewers expressing significant dislike primarily stemming from the perceived deviations from J.R.R. Tolkien's established lore and stories. One of the biggest criticisms in the show's perceived departure from the Tolkien's writing is particularly concerning characters' backstories, timelines, and the overall narrative around the Second Age. For example, some people also were upset with the compressed timeline of events that originally spanned thousands of years and contradictions with established canon. Critics argue that the show contradicts or retcons established lore from the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings. Some viewers found the characters, particularly the original ones, to be underdeveloped and lacking clear motivations. Critics felt that showrunners didn't stay true to the established personalities of iconic characters like Galadriel and Elrond. Some found the storytelling slow-paced and lacking in narrative tension, also failing to hold their attention, I guess, aka it's boring. Some other viewers also found the dialogue to be very poorly written, pretentious, or even just nonsensical. Viewers found the CGI to the show to look too perfect and artificial, detaching them from the suspension of disbelief. Some found that the costumes and the makeup and the visual representations of certain characters and races to be unrealistic and unconvincing. Some viewers criticized the portrayal of female characters as strong, capable, viewing it as a departure from the traditional gender roles in Tolkien's work. The Rings of Power faced review bombing on platforms like Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb, with users posting negative reviews to deliberately lower the show's overall rating, although I don't think that would make people like it more. The show also ignited debates and heated discussions on social media platforms, with some expressing strong opinions about the show's perceived flaws. Now, this is not to say that there can't be good shows around Lord of the Rings. People want to hear stories from Middle-earth. Like, if you've seen Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, it's an anime, but it's so good on HBO, should check it out. I think that is really good storytelling, and I think that it really fits into the Lord of the Rings universe. If you're going to make stories like that, I'm all in. Good character development, all the characters have motivations, there's heartbreak, tragedy, there's a bit of mystery involved in it. I just think that War of the Rohirrim is a perfect example of how you make a really good Lord of the Rings story. Not this Ring of Power shit. I just think that what the difference here is Peter Jackson's love of the lore and trying to keep it accurate is what made his movie so great, as where Amazon's got the Silmarillion sitting right there. They could tell amazing stories from the Silmarillion, but instead they're just like, you know what? We're gonna do our own thing. And that's why people hate it. And as I mentioned previously, the reason that so many people love the Peter Jackson movies was due to the loyalty that Jackson gave the original books. Amazon, in their infinite wisdom, decided to take liberties with that story and just rubbed many fans the wrong way. As a fan of Lord of the Rings, I welcome new stories. Please expand the universe and give fans content to watch. However, I feel it's important to treat Tolkien's work as biblical as opposed to just guidelines. The Silmarillion, while being harder to adapt, has plenty of stories that would make for great TV shows. Amazon's direction seems to be, well, we'll tell Tolkien stories better than him, which is destined to be a failure if you ask me. In conclusion, the fundamental conflict between the forces of good and evil embodied by Sauron and those who oppose him is a timeless struggle that resonates with people across cultures and time periods. The story explores the seductive nature of power and its ability to corrupt even the most well-intentioned individuals, a theme that remains relevant in society today. The bonds of friendship, the loyalty exemplified by the Fellowship, and especially by the unwavering loyalty of Samwise Gamgee are central to the story and provide a powerful reminder of the strength found in human connection. And during the internet days, I mean, that's important, right? And despite the overwhelming odds, the characters in The Lord of the Rings continually remind us of the importance of hope and courage, even in the darkest of times. Tolkien's intricate world building, with its detailed histories, languages, cultures, and geography, creates a world that feels real and allows readers to become fully immersed in the story. The story draws heavy and ancient myths of folklore, giving it a sense of timelessness and tapping into the universal archetypes and narratives. The story is set in a world with a long and rich history, much like Game of Thrones, which gives the events of The Lord of the Rings a sense of weight and significance. In fact, J.R.R. Martin, who wrote Game of Thrones, took a lot of inspiration from Tolkien's work. And his name, apparently. When you have characters like Frodo, despite their heroic actions, they're relatable because they are flawed and vulnerable, struggling with the weight of their burden. The story highlights the potential for even the humblest individual to achieve great things, such as hobbits. a crucial role in the destruction of the ring. Sauron never saw it coming. The variety of characters representing different races and cultures, allowing readers to connect with individuals from different backgrounds. Ultimately, The Lord of the Rings is a timeless tale because it addresses universal human experiences and emotions. It is set in a richly imagined world and features characters that readers can connect with on a deep level. Its enduring themes and captivating storytelling ensure its continued relevance and popularity for generations to come. With that said, that's going to be the end of my Lord of the Rings video recap. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you like this video, please hit the bell icon. Consider subscribing. It helps out the channel a lot. Leave a comment. Who's your favorite character from Lord of the Rings or your favorite moment? Could be a good guy, could be a bad guy. I'm not judging. Again, I think Balrogs are dope as hell. They're scary, but they're dope. If you guys enjoyed this video and you want to know about my favorite anime, click this video on screen right here.